So why can't God be a girl? Why can't God be non-binary? Why is it that God has to be Father? Why is it that he has to be part of this terrible toxic patriarchy that we hear so much about these days that we're all so desperately trying to get rid of? Well, unfortunately for the many liberal denominations in churches these days, and those who want to promote egalitarianism, there's actually a reason for God to be a father. There's a reason he has to be masculine. Now, I'd want to make these videos as bite-sized as possible, so I won't ramble on as much as I could. But I want to focus on two really important points that we need to notice. One is doctrinal, that deals with our salvation, and the other is pertaining to the created order, the natural flow of God's creation. So first off, we want to start with the scripture as it pertains to the doctrine of our salvation. Of course, in Genesis, the creation account, we see that God made Adam first and then Eve. Paul reinforces this in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, in speaking about why women cannot have authority over men in the church. He says, "For Adam was created first, and then Eve. The masculine came before the feminine." The masculine was created first, then the feminine proceeded from there. This is a very important thing, and people don't realize why this is important and how important it is. You see, there is an order of responsibility that we see in Scripture. As the man came first and then the woman, the man has unique responsibilities that are not attributed to women. The masculine has unique qualities, unique responsibilities that are not a part of the feminine. And so, when we try to adjust the way these two forces have a relationship with each other, oftentimes we don't realize that these little adjustments that we make have catastrophic detriment to the entire doctrine of our salvation, the entire order and structure of our faith itself, and of the nature of how the universe was formed and how it works. So, man was created first, then woman. Man has specific responsibilities. Man, as we see in Ephesians chapter 5, is responsible for loving his wife as Christ loved the church. Now, women are commanded to respect, honor, and obey their husbands, but only men are commanded to love their wives as Christ loved the church, and to lay down their lives for their wives as Christ laid down his life for the church. Now, it might be fine and good and honorable for a woman to do so, and she might desire freely to do so, to give her life for her family, to love her family unconditionally. But she is not commanded to do this in Scripture. The man is commanded to do this. The man is commanded, whether he wants to or not, to love his wife and to die for her if need be, as Christ did for the church. Man, coming first, has unique responsibilities. In addition to this, the man is the head of his line. He represents his line. This is known as the doctrine of federal headship, which is another doctrine that a lot of modern churches don't like too much, but too bad. It is how the Scripture explains itself. It is scriptural. It is what the Scripture says, and therefore we can either submit to it or rebel against it. We cannot alter it. We see this in many passages, notably In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 9, we see that Levi is said to have paid tribute to Melchizedek while in his father's loins. Levi wasn't alive when Abraham met Melchizedek. Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and it is said that Levi did so as well, as he was in his father's loins. You see, the father, the patriarch, if people in these days hate that word, but get used to it, learn to love it. Scripture speaks highly of it. The patriarch represents his line. What the patriarch does is said to have been done by the line. We see this in Hebrews, and we see it most pertinent to us in Romans chapter 5, beginning in verse 12. And we also see in parallel to this, 1 Corinthians 15:21. We see this comparison of Adam and Jesus. Adam, who sinned, and when he sinned, all sinned in him. Jesus, who when he fulfilled the law, all were fulfilled and made righteous in him. If we reject that we are represented by our patriarch, say those who reject the doctrine of original sin, that we have fallen in Adam, that all are sinners in him, which Scripture plainly teaches, that when Adam sinned, all sinned. As we see in Romans, in the Greek, the wording there is in the aorist indicative tense, which means that it is an action that was completed in the past. So before we were born, we sinned, because Adam sinned, and he represents us through his line. Just in the same way, Jesus represents us if we are in him. If we reject that Adam represents us, if we reject that the patriarch represents us, then we must reject that Jesus represents us in imputing his righteousness to us. So you see, if we pull that one pin out, and this is so prevalent and such a problem in the modern progressive-minded churches, when we pull one little pin out because we don't like it, we don't realize that we're collapsing the entire building. And that's what we want to be cautious about. If we don't accept representation by Adam, our patriarch in the flesh, then we must also reject our representation by Jesus, our patriarch in the spirit. So it's very important that we understand this. This patriarchy, this responsibility of manness, this masculine responsibility, cannot be overlooked, and it cannot be taken out of our scripture. We can't have the feminine taking this role for itself that is very explicitly given to the masculine. Now, we might say, well, okay, scripture says that we are represented by the patriarch, by Adam, by Jesus. Well, why then how does that mean that God has to be masculine? Can't God be feminine? Well, first off, we see that Jesus, by this very necessity, had to be born as a man. This is why he couldn't be born as a woman. It wouldn't have worked because he would not have had this masculine role to play if he were a woman. So he had to be born in a male body so that he could take up the masculine role of being the patriarch, the representative, our high priest. So the Father also must be masculine in this created order. Now for this, we have to get a little technical, a little almost esoteric. For a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, but this is a fact. This is how the Hebrew culture was. This is the Hebrew language, the way it was written. All ancient cultures, their languages, the way they perceived reality, it was not simply a way to express words like we do today, empty words. The language, the alphabet, had a very intimate connection with their cosmology, their understanding of how things existed in reality. And we see the name of God, what's called, the sacred name, the tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He. We see the beginning letter there is Yod. Same for Jesus, Yeshua, is Yod. Yod is the beginning of the name of the Father and the Son. Yod is a tiny dot. It is the smallest of the Hebrew alphabet, and yet it is said that Yod is what holds together and gives life to the entire alphabet. The entire thing collapses without Yod. Yod represents the spirit. You see, the spirit is masculine. The spirit, everything that is abstract, mental, spiritual, is masculine. Everything that is gross, physical, dense, is feminine. All created reality is feminine. All mental and spiritual reality is masculine. By definition, in the order of the universe, God, being ultimate mind, ultimate spirit, is masculine. It is the masculine role, the masculine quality to be spirit. Yod is the spirit, the beginning. It is a small dot, and then it comes down. It arcs, is a part of it that arcs down, representing the letter Vav, which we also see in the Tetragrammaton. Vav is the connecting point, the hook that connects heaven and earth, the spiritual and the physical. And then we see at the top of the Yod, there's another mark that represents Dalet, the doorway into manifestation. The Jewish people, the Hebrew people, understood that the masculine role was to provide the spark, the initiation, that would then come through the door and manifest into reality. The feminine is the door that brings forth the spark of the idea that is supplied by the masculine. And we can understand how this relates to our physical reality. The seed of the male is taken by the female in order to form life, to form a new creation. This is a representation of what happens in spiritual reality. The idea, the thought, the mental realm gives the inspiration that can then be taken and made manifest into physical reality. If we say that God is feminine, God is a woman, God is female, we are undermining the order of creation in the order of the created universe, the order that things flow through in order to come into manifestation. The feminine by itself is all structure, all physical reality, but it has no idea, no direction. The masculine is the idea, just as Jesus is said to be the Word, the Logos, in John 1. The Logos carries with it the meaning of not just word, but the idea behind the word. It is the idea, the thought, that then becomes the word. The vibration of the word echoes across the waters and brings forth all creation, as we see in Genesis 1. So all of these things play a role, and we have to understand that there is a reason why the masculine is attributed to the Father, is attributed to God. God has to be in this masculine sense. He necessarily is masculine, even though he exhibits feminine qualities, of course. We see this in the letter He. He is the Dalet with a Yod. It is the Spirit coming through the door. It represents the breath of God coming forth and giving life. He also tends to feminize or add a feminine quality to a word in which it is placed. So if you add an H or a He to a root word, you can often have, depending on the context, you can have the quality of giving it a feminine nature or a feminine quality or the quality of this creation. So we see all of this in the Tetragrammaton. But first and foremost, God is masculine, Yod. His breath is the creative force, He. Vav is the connection of heaven and earth, hey, again, is what brings forth creation in this feminine creation sense. In many Jewish customs, it is said that the actual creative power of God is a feminine quality, whereas God himself is masculine. And this makes sense and in keeping with the language and with the structured order of the universe and of bringing things into manifest reality. But regardless, as I said, without getting into too much detail, there's a reason why things are the way they are in Scripture. And we modern know-it-alls need to quit trying to modify things to fit how we think they ought to be, because these so-called scholars of this modern day, these false theologians, many of whom don't even really believe in the inerrancy of Scripture or the inspiration of Scripture. Honestly, I don't know why a lot of them are even bothering to study theology or head churches to begin with, unless they're just trying to deliberately lead people astray. But we have to understand that everything is the way it is for a reason in Scripture. And when we try to mess with that, we try to change things, oftentimes unknowingly, because we don't comprehend the full scope of what's happening. We end up pulling out one part that we think doesn't matter, and we collapse the whole structure. So it's very important to remember that. So I'll cut it short here. If you want more of this, really deep dives into these kind of interesting esoteric cultural things, definitely check out my main channel, Thunder Dragon Nigong. This basically is just a rant on why people need to quit messing with Scripture. God is a man, not a physical man. He's masculine. He's a male. And he has to be. There's a reason. If you take that away, you try to make him non-binary or gender neutral or feminine, you're actually corrupting the whole process of creation and of our salvation. So keep that in mind. And people, if you're going to teach this stuff, do your studies. Remember that a teacher is going to be judged more harshly than just a regular person. If you're going to teach this stuff, you're going to go out there and peddle this nonsense, make sure you've done your studies and you know what you're talking about. You can't change things just because you want to be fitting in with society. All right, so we'll cut it short there. I'll have plenty more to say about different things in upcoming videos. Take care and God bless. We'll see you later.